While scrolling through his messages, she stumbled upon a series of texts from Angela, explicit, unmistakable, and impossible to explain away. Horrified, she immediately contacted the police. The investigation that followed was swift. Detectives uncovered a trail of evidence, text messages, call logs, and testimony from Michael himself. Angela Carter was arrested at school in front of colleagues and students, an image that would remain burned into the memory of the community. The shock was immense. Parents who had once admired her now questioned how such betrayal could happen under their noses. Students who had looked up to her were left confused, torn between the image of the teacher they adored and the predator revealed in court documents. At trial, Angela's defense team tried to argue that the relationship had been consensual, that Michael had pursued her, that she had simply made poor decisions. But the prosecution made the truth clear. A teenager cannot consent to a sexual relationship with an adult in a position of authority. The power dynamic alone made it exploitation, and Angela had crossed that line again and again. The jury was unflinching. Angela Carter was found guilty of sexual misconduct with a minor, sentenced to years in prison, and ordered to register as a sex offender upon her release. Her teaching license was permanently revoked. Her career in ruins. She went from being one of the most admired teachers in the district to one of its most infamous criminals. For Michael, the aftermath was complex. While some of his peers initially saw him as lucky for having been involved with a teacher, the reality was far darker. He struggled with feelings of confusion, betrayal, and shame. What he had thought was love turned out to be abuse. Therapy helped, but the scars remained. For his family, the betrayal was deeply personal. They had trusted Angela, allowed her into their son's life, and she had manipulated that trust in the worst possible way. For the community, the case was devastating. It forced parents to reevaluate how much trust they placed in teachers. It forced administrators to confront uncomfortable questions about boundaries, supervision, and oversight. The school board implemented new rules restricting teacher-student communication outside of official channels, a direct result of Angela's abuse of technology to groom her victim. Looking back, Angela Carter's case is a reminder that predators do not always fit the image we expect. Sometimes they are the charismatic, beloved figures, the ones parents admire and students flock to. It is a chilling truth that authority, admiration, and respect can be twisted into tools of exploitation when placed in the wrong hands. The haunting question remains: how many signs were ignored before her crimes came to light? Were there other students who experienced the same manipulation but never spoke up? These are the questions that linger in the minds of parents and educators, reminders that trust alone is never enough. Vigilance, accountability, and constant oversight are necessary to protect the most vulnerable. Angela Carter's story stands as both a warning and a tragedy, a warning of how dangerous blurred boundaries can become, and a tragedy for the young lives disrupted by one teacher's selfish decisions. Her fall from grace is not just the loss of a career, but the destruction of faith in a system meant to safeguard children. And for those who lived through it, The echoes of that betrayal remain a stark reminder of the hidden horrors that can lurk even in the classroom. In 2005, a small town in Oklahoma became the center of a case that would horrify parents, devastate students, and permanently stain the reputation of a once beloved teacher. His name was Daniel Roberts, a history instructor known for his animated storytelling and his ability to bring the past to life. For years, students described him as one of the cool teachers, someone who made learning fun and relatable. He dressed casually, cracked jokes in class, and seemed to genuinely connect with teenagers in a way that made him stand out from his stricter colleagues. But behind the charisma and the approachable demeanor, Daniel was hiding a disturbing secret. He was using his position to prey on the very children entrusted to his care. Daniel had been at the school for nearly 15 years. He coached the debate team, organized history fairs, and often volunteered for field trips. Parents liked him because their kids liked him. Teachers admired his energy and his ability to keep restless students engaged. Administrators saw him as dependable, someone who rarely caused trouble and always seemed willing to take on extra work. His popularity, however, gave him cover. Few questioned his motives when he stayed late with students. Few thought twice when he spent time with teenagers outside of school, insisting it was all in the name of mentorship. It started with a 15-year-old student named Sarah. She was quiet, studious, and often overlooked by her peers. Daniel noticed her immediately. He praised her essays, told her she was smarter than most of her classmates, and began encouraging her to stay after school for extra help. Those sessions initially revolved around assignments, but gradually they shifted into personal conversations. Daniel asked about her family, her insecurities, her friendships. He positioned himself as a confidant, someone who understood her in ways no one else did. To Sarah, his attention felt validating. To Daniel, it was the first step in grooming. Soon, the relationship crossed lines. Compliments became flirtations. A touch on the arm lingered too long. He began sending her emails from his personal account, messages filled with compliments that no teacher should ever send to a student. Eventually, the interactions escalated into outright abuse. Under the guise of mentorship, Daniel manipulated Sarah into a relationship she could neither comprehend nor consent to. For months, no one suspected a thing. Daniel's reputation protected him. When colleagues saw him spending time with Sarah, they assumed he was helping a struggling student. When Sarah's parents noticed she was staying late after school, they were grateful that a teacher was investing extra time in her education. The secrecy gave Daniel confidence, and soon he began grooming other students in similar ways. But secrets don't stay hidden forever. It was another teacher who first grew suspicious. She noticed Sarah seemed nervous around Daniel, avoiding eye contact and growing quiet whenever he entered the room. She also noticed how Daniel seemed unusually attentive to certain students, always choosing the most vulnerable or impressionable ones. The teacher reported her concerns to the principal, but at first, little was done. After all, Daniel Roberts was one of their most trusted staff members. The truth finally surfaced When Sarah confided in a close friend, unable to carry the burden of the relationship any longer, that friend, horrified, told her parents, who immediately contacted law enforcement. The investigators moved quickly. They seized Daniel's computer and uncovered emails and chat logs that revealed months of inappropriate communication. When Sarah agreed to cooperate, she provided testimony that confirmed the abuse. Daniel Roberts was arrested at school in front of stunned students and colleagues. The news spread instantly, shaking the community to its core. Parents were furious, demanding answers from the administration about how such behavior could go unnoticed for so long. Students who once idolized Daniel were left reeling, their memories of his lively lessons now poisoned by the knowledge of what he had done behind closed doors. At trial, the evidence was overwhelming. Prosecutors presented the emails, the testimonies, and the pattern of grooming that Daniel had perfected over the years. They emphasized the abuse of power, the way he exploited his position of trust to manipulate children into silence. The defense attempted to argue that the relationships were misunderstood, but the jury was unmoved. Daniel Roberts was convicted of multiple counts of sexual misconduct with a minor, sentenced to decades in prison, and forced to register as a sex offender for life. His teaching career was not just over, it was erased. His name permanently associated with betrayal and abuse. For Sarah and the other victims, the aftermath was agonizing. They struggled with feelings of shame, guilt, and confusion, though none of it was their fault. Many faced bullying from peers who didn't understand the dynamics of abuse, who dismissed their trauma as scandal rather than exploitation. Counseling was provided, but the road to healing was long and uncertain. The school faced backlash as well. Parents demanded stricter policies, new oversight measures, and greater accountability for teachers who crossed boundaries. Administrators were forced to admit that warning signs had been overlooked. The trust had blinded them to the possibility of betrayal. For the broader community, the case became a painful reminder that predators do not always look like strangers lurking outside school grounds. Sometimes they are the ones standing at the front of the classroom, hiding behind charm, humor, and respectability. Looking back, Daniel Roberts' story is not just about one man's crimes. It is about the fragility of trust in the educational system. It forces us to ask hard questions. How many times did students stay silent out of fear or confusion? How many adults ignored warning signs because it was easier to believe in the illusion of safety? The haunting truth is that Daniel Roberts was able to operate for years without suspicion, shielded by his reputation and the blind trust of those around him. His downfall serves as a chilling reminder that vigilance must never falter, that protecting children requires constant awareness, and that sometimes the greatest dangers are hidden in plain sight. In 2011, in a quiet suburban district of Northern California, a high school math teacher named Richard Hale was exposed as one of the most disturbing predators the community had ever encountered. To most, Richard was the kind of teacher parents wished for their children: disciplined, intelligent, and known for producing high test scores. His classroom was orderly, his lessons clear, and he projected the image of a strict but fair instructor. Students described him as serious, sometimes intimidating, but undeniably effective. Parents admired his reputation for preparing kids for college-level mathematics. But Richard Hale's control extended far beyond the curriculum. He had mastered a form of psychological manipulation that kept his students obedient, fearful, and isolated. What appeared to be firm discipline was, in reality, a strategy to dominate the classroom in ways that left vulnerable students defenseless. It started with small rules that seemed harmless on the surface. Students were not allowed to leave their seats without permission. They could not speak unless called on. They had to submit homework in a very specific format, and any deviation resulted in public humiliation. Over time, these rules created an atmosphere where Richard was not just a teacher, he was an authority figure who demanded absolute obedience. Into this environment entered a 16-year-old girl named Emily, bright, ambitious, and determined to pursue a career in science. She initially admired Richard's strictness. She wanted to excel, and his approval seemed like a ticket to success. Richard quickly identified her as a target. He praised her work, gave her subtle privileges others did not receive, and positioned himself as the gatekeeper of her academic future. Soon, he began pulling Emily aside after class. At first, the conversations were about advanced math concepts, but gradually they shifted into personal questions. Did she have a boyfriend? Did she trust her parents? Did she feel like she was different from the other students? Richard framed these interactions as mentorship, but in reality, they were calculated steps to isolate her. Within months, Emily was caught in a web she couldn't escape. Richard manipulated her with a mixture of praise and intimidation. He told her she was special, smarter than her peers, and destined for greatness, but only if she kept his trust. At the same time, he warned her that if she ever betrayed him, no one would believe her. After all, he was the respected teacher, the authority figure, and she was just a teenager. The abuse escalated when Richard convinced Emily to meet him outside of school under the guise of tutoring. He began crossing boundaries, blurring the lines between academic support and personal involvement. When Emily resisted, he reminded her of the consequences, her grades, her reputation, her future. She felt trapped, powerless to escape the grip of someone who held so much sway over her life. The situation might have continued indefinitely if not for a single mistake. One evening, Emily's mother discovered a series of text messages on her daughter's phone. At first, they seemed like reminders about homework assignments, but as she scrolled further, the tone shifted. Compliments about Emily's appearance, suggestions to keep their conversations secret, and subtle but unmistakable manipulation were all there in writing. Alarmed, Emily's mother confronted her. The truth spilled out in fragments through tears and fear. Emily admitted that her teacher had been crossing boundaries for months, that she felt cornered and unable to resist. Her parents wasted no time contacting the authorities. The investigation that followed revealed that Emily was not the only victim. Several former students came forward with eerily similar stories, private tutoring sessions that turned into personal confessions, favoritism that gradually became control, and subtle threats that kept them silent. Richard Hale had been operating this way for years, carefully avoiding discovery by preying on students least likely to speak out. When police examined his laptop and phone, they uncovered dozens of inappropriate messages along with meticulously organized files of student records and personal information he had collected. The evidence painted a clear picture. Richard was not simply a teacher who had crossed boundaries. He was a predator who had built a system of control within the walls of his classroom. The trial was harrowing. Emily and other victims testified, their voices shaking as they described how a trusted teacher had manipulated and violated them. Parents filled the courtroom, their faces a mixture of rage and disbelief. Prosecutors emphasized the deliberate nature of Richard's actions, the way he used authority and intellect not to educate, but to exploit. The defense tried to portray Richard as misunderstood, suggesting that his strict methods and personal interest in students were taken out of context. But the weight of evidence, text messages, testimonies, and patterns of behavior was undeniable. The jury convicted him on multiple counts of sexual exploitation and abuse of power. Richard Hale was sentenced to more than 25 years in prison. His teaching license was revoked, his reputation destroyed. What had once seemed like an image of discipline and excellence was revealed to be a facade, a mask for predatory behavior. For Emily, the scars remained. She struggled with trust, haunted by the way someone she admired had betrayed her so deeply. Her path to healing was long and uncertain, but her courage in speaking out ensured that Richard could never hurt another student again. The school district faced public outrage. Parents demanded answers. How could such behavior go undetected for so long? Why had no one questioned Richard's excessive control over students, his private tutoring sessions, or the fear he instilled in his classes? The district was forced to overhaul its policies, instituting new rules on teacher-student communication, mandatory reporting, and stricter oversight of after-school interactions. In the end, the story of Richard Hale stands as a chilling reminder that abuse in schools is not always obvious. Sometimes it hides behind strictness, discipline, and academic success. Sometimes the very traits that make a teacher admired by parents and administrators are the same traits that give them the power to manipulate and control students. The true horror of this case lies not only in Richard's crimes, but in the silence that allowed them to continue. His classroom, once a place of learning, became a prison for those he targeted, and for the victims, the lesson was one they should never have had to learn: that trust can be weaponized and authority can become the mask of a predator. In 1997, in a quiet rural town in Kentucky, a beloved elementary school teacher named Martha Collins was exposed for crimes that shattered the community's faith in the very foundation of its education system. For years, she had been considered a model of dedication. She decorated her classroom with cheerful posters, remembered every student's birthday, and even visited families during holidays. Parents trusted her so completely that some said they felt relieved when their children were assigned to her class. She wasn't just a teacher, she was woven into the fabric of the town. But beneath the warm exterior, Martha carried a darkness no one wanted to imagine. She had perfected the art of appearing nurturing while carefully choosing her victims, children who were quiet, vulnerable, or came from families too overwhelmed to question authority. Her methods were insidious, subtle enough to evade suspicion, but devastating to those she targeted. One of those children was 10-year-old Jacob. His family had recently moved to the town after his father lost his job in the city. Jacob was shy, often keeping to himself. Martha noticed him. Immediately, she gave him extra attention, praising his work, assigning him classroom responsibilities, and telling his parents he was exceptionally bright. To Jacob, this attention felt like acceptance. He trusted her completely. It started with harmless gestures, sitting closer to him during reading time, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. Then it escalated. Martha began arranging special tutoring sessions for Jacob after school. At first, it was reading and math drills, but soon the atmosphere shifted. The classroom doors would be locked, the blinds pulled down. What should have been lessons became grooming sessions where Martha blurred the lines between care and control. Jacob was too young to understand what was happening, but he knew it felt wrong. Still, Martha's authority was absolute. She told him not to speak of their secret lessons, warning him that if anyone found out, he would be blamed for ruining her life, and his parents would be ashamed. For a 10-year-old desperate for approval, the threat was paralyzing. The abuse continued for months, hidden in plain sight. Martha maintained her reputation, smiling at parents, organizing school events, even leading the choir at church. But the mask began to slip when Jacob's behavior changed. He grew withdrawn, stopped eating, and started having nightmares. His parents noticed but assumed the move and new environment were the cause. Only when Jacob confided in his older sister in a broken whisper one night did the truth come out. The revelation tore through the family. His parents, devastated and enraged, contacted the authorities immediately. The investigation that followed uncovered a chilling pattern. Jacob was not the only child. Several former students, now older, came forward with memories they had buried, private sessions, inappropriate touching, whispered threats. Each story mirrored the others, painting a portrait of a predator who had been operating under the guise of kindness for years. When police searched Martha's home, they found journals, pages filled with obsessive notes about her students, detailing their habits, fears, and vulnerabilities. It became clear that her actions were not impulsive, but calculated, a systematic targeting of children she knew she could manipulate. The trial was one of the most painful events the community had ever endured. Parents filled the courtroom, struggling to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the monster revealed before them. Jacob testified, his voice trembling, recounting moments that no child should ever have to remember. Other victims, older now but still scarred, shared their experiences. The defense tried to argue that the children were misinterpreting Martha's actions, that her nurturing behavior had been twisted into something sinister by overprotective parents. But the weight of evidence, the journals, the testimonies, The consistency of the accounts was overwhelming. The jury took less than 3 hours to convict her on multiple counts of child abuse and endangerment. Martha Collins was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The image of the caring teacher collapsed instantly. She was stripped of her accolades, her name removed from plaques and awards. The school repainted her classroom, tore down the decorations she'd once hung with such pride, and tried desperately to erase the memory of her presence. But for Jacob and the other children, erasure was impossible. The damage she inflicted followed them into adulthood. Trust became fragile, authority figures seemed dangerous, and the innocence of their childhoods had been stolen by someone who should have protected them. The community itself was fractured. For years afterward, parents second-guessed every teacher, every mentor, every adult who came into contact with their children. Conversations at school board meetings turned heated, with parents demanding stricter oversight, surveillance in classrooms, and new training for staff. The sense of safety that once defined the small town was gone, replaced by suspicion and fear. In reflection, the story of Martha Collins forces a haunting question: how many predators hide behind the masks of kindness, slipping unnoticed into the lives of those they harm? It challenges the notion of trust within communities, showing that evil often wears the most familiar smile. For Jacob, the memories of those afternoons in the locked classroom never faded. He grew older, pursued therapy, and eventually began to speak publicly about his experience. His voice, once silenced by threats, became a source of strength for other survivors. In time, his courage helped transform his trauma into advocacy, warning others to watch for the subtle signs of grooming that often go overlooked. Yet no amount of advocacy could undo what had been done. The shadow of Martha's crimes lingered in the town, a permanent scar on its history. Every parent who once trusted without question now carried the weight of vigilance, and every child who passed through that school lived in the shadow of what had happened within its walls. The horror of the case was not just in the abuse itself, but in the betrayal, the realization that someone entrusted with shaping young minds had chosen instead to destroy them. In 2004, in a bustling city in Texas, the case of a high school English teacher named Daniel Mercer shocked both parents and educators across the nation. Mercer was charismatic, articulate, and passionate about literature. His students admired the way he brought novels to life, weaving stories with such intensity that even the most disengaged teens found themselves paying attention. Parents praised him for igniting a love of reading in their children, and administrators viewed him as one of the school's strongest assets. But behind his charming personality and inspiring classroom presence, Mercer harbored dark intentions that would ultimately unravel his career and devastate those who trusted him most. It began subtly, as it often does. Mercer gravitated toward vulnerable students, particularly those struggling at home. He positioned himself as a mentor, someone who could guide them through academic and personal hardships. For a 17-year-old girl, named Lauren. This mentorship became a lifeline. Her parents were going through a bitter divorce. Her grades were slipping, and she often felt invisible. Mercer noticed her isolation and offered her comfort in the form of extended conversations after class. At first, it was about her essays and poetry, but soon it drifted into personal territory, her feelings, her family life, and her insecurities. Lauren, desperate for an adult she could trust, leaned into the attention. Mercer told her she was gifted, that her writing revealed depths beyond her years, and that she was misunderstood by her peers. These affirmations, carefully crafted, drew her closer, creating a dependency that blurred the lines between teacher and student. The relationship escalated when Mercer began contacting Lauren outside of school. Late-night emails and text messages, initially framed as discussions about literature, became increasingly personal. He shared details about his own life, his frustrations with his marriage, and his claim that he had never met a student who understood him the way she did. The manipulation was gradual but deliberate, designed to make Lauren feel special and irreplaceable. Soon their exchanges became physical. Mercer offered to drive her home from school events, ensuring moments of privacy. In those stolen minutes, his mentorship transformed into something predatory. He kissed her, convinced her that what they shared was love, and told her no one else would understand. He framed their relationship as a forbidden romance, painting himself as a man torn between responsibility and passion. For a teenager searching for meaning, the narrative was intoxicating, but secrecy has cracks. Another teacher noticed Mercer spending unusual amounts of time with Lauren and reported her concerns to the administration. Initially, the school brushed it off. After all, Mercer was one of their most respected educators. But suspicion grew when rumors circulated among students. A friend of Lauren's eventually confided in a counselor, and soon an investigation was underway. When confronted, Mercer denied everything. He insisted he was only mentoring a troubled student, and that any perception of impropriety was exaggerated. But investigators seized his phone and laptop, uncovering hundreds of messages between him and Lauren. The tone left little room for doubt. Professions of love, plans for secret meetings, and language far beyond the scope of a teacher-student relationship. The discovery devastated Lauren's parents. They had trusted Mercer, believing he was helping their daughter during a difficult time. Instead, they learned that he had exploited her vulnerability, entangling her in a manipulative cycle disguised as affection. Lauren, when questioned, broke down. She admitted what had happened, but defended Mercer, echoing the lies he had planted. In her mind, that their relationship was real, that it was different, that no one else could understand. The trial that followed was brutal. Lauren testified, her voice trembling as she recounted the progression of their relationship. Prosecutors highlighted the power imbalance, the way Mercer had taken advantage of his authority to groom and manipulate her. The defense tried to argue that the relationship was consensual, that Lauren had pursued him, but the law was clear. As a teacher, he had an obligation to protect his students, not exploit them. Mercer was convicted of multiple charges, including sexual assault of a minor, and abuse of authority. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, his teaching license permanently revoked. His once bright reputation collapsed overnight, replaced by the image of a predator who had betrayed his students, his profession, and his community. For Lauren, the aftermath was devastating. She grappled with guilt, shame, and confusion, struggling to reconcile her feelings with the reality of what had happened. Therapy helped her begin to untangle the manipulation, to understand that what she thought was love had been control. But the scars lingered, shaping her relationships and her sense of self for years to come. The school district faced a firestorm of criticism. Parents demanded accountability. Furious that warning signs had been ignored, policies were rewritten, training sessions on grooming behaviors mandated, and stricter monitoring of teacher-student communication enforced. The community, once proud of its school, was left shaken, forced to confront the reality that predators can hide in plain sight, cloaked in charisma and trust. The story of Daniel Mercer endures as a reminder of the fragility of trust between students and teachers. It shows how easily authority can be abused, how mentorship can be twisted into manipulation, and how victims can be convinced to protect the very people who harm them. For Lauren, the betrayal shaped her into an advocate. Years later, she began speaking publicly about her experience, warning others to recognize the red flags she had missed. Her courage transformed her pain into a call for vigilance, ensuring that her story could prevent others from suffering the same fate. And yet the haunting question remains: how many teachers like Mercer go unnoticed, their crimes hidden beneath charm and praise, while vulnerable students continue to be exploited in silence? The lesson is clear. Trust must always be paired with vigilance, because even the most inspiring classroom can conceal horrors no one wants to see. In 2016, in a quiet New Jersey suburb, the community was shattered by the case of middle school science teacher Thomas Whitfield. For nearly 15 years, Whitfield had been a fixture at the school. He was known for his eccentric teaching style, bringing in strange experiments, turning lessons into games, and convincing even the most restless students to pay attention. Parents admired him for sparking curiosity in their children, and students affectionately called him Mr. W. He had built a reputation as the fun teacher, the one kids would remember long after leaving his class. But behind the charm, behind the laughter and hands-on experiments, Whitfield concealed a darkness that would forever change the lives of his students and community. The first sign came in whispers. A student, 13-year-old Olivia, began to tell her best friend that she didn't like the way Mr. W touched her shoulder when leaning over her desk. She said his hand lingered too long, that his compliments sometimes made her uncomfortable, but her friend dismissed it. Mr. W was everyone's favorite teacher, and adults constantly praised him. Olivia stayed quiet, convincing herself she was overreacting. But she wasn't. Whitfield had a pattern. He singled out vulnerable students, those struggling with self-esteem, those desperate for approval, those from households too distracted to notice changes. He made them feel special, offering privileges like extra lab time, private tutoring, or letting them assist with experiments. He cloaked his grooming in academic enthusiasm, disguising it as encouragement. For Olivia, the attention grew overwhelming. Whitfield began messaging her through a classroom app, at first about assignments, then about personal matters, her hobbies, her feelings, even her appearance. By the spring semester, the relationship escalated. Whitfield orchestrated moments where he and Olivia were alone in the science lab after school. The once safe classroom, filled with microscopes and test tubes, became a trap. He blurred boundaries, telling Olivia she was mature beyond her years, that their connection was unique and something others wouldn't understand. For a child, those words carried enormous weight. She felt torn between discomfort and a desperate need to please the adult she trusted. Everything began to unravel when Olivia's older brother noticed her phone buzzing late at night. Curious, he looked at the screen and saw a message preview from Mr. W. The wording wasn't academic, it was intimate, too personal to be innocent. Alarmed, he told their parents, who confronted Olivia. Through tears and fear, she admitted the truth. Her teacher had been grooming her, making her keep secrets, and she didn't know how to stop it. The parents immediately contacted authorities. What followed was a swift but devastating investigation. Police seized Whitfield's phone and computer, uncovering dozens of inappropriate messages, not just to Olivia, but to other students, past and present. Some messages were framed as jokes, others as compliments, but together they revealed a disturbing pattern of predatory behavior stretching back years. The digital trail was undeniable, a carefully maintained web of manipulation cloaked in the image of a friendly teacher. As investigators dug deeper, more victims came forward. Former students, now in college or starting families, admitted they too had once felt something was wrong, but were too afraid to speak. They described private lab sessions, secretive conversations, and subtle threats masked as promises. Whitfield's persona as the eccentric, fun teacher had been his greatest weapon, shielding him from suspicion while he operated in plain sight. The trial was grueling. Olivia testified, her voice cracking, as she described how her trust had been twisted into fear. Other victims followed, recounting experiences that mirrored her own. The courtroom was filled with parents, many of whom had once praised Whitfield, now struggling with guilt for never seeing what was happening. Prosecutors built their case around the calculated nature of his grooming, the way he used his role to control, manipulate, and silence children. Whitfield's defense attempted to dismiss the messages as misunderstood jokes, his attention as enthusiastic teaching. But the sheer volume of evidence made such arguments futile. The jury, confronted with message after message, with testimony after testimony, convicted him on multiple counts of child endangerment, exploitation, and abuse of power. The sentencing was swift. Whitfield was given 40 years in prison, effectively ensuring he would never walk free again. His teaching license was revoked, his name struck from every school honor roll, every plaque, every memory of achievement. The man, once beloved as Mr. W., was reduced to a cautionary tale. The impact on the community was profound. Parents wrestled with the reality that they had entrusted their children to a predator. Teachers faced new scrutiny, their interactions with students viewed with suspicion. The school board was forced to implement sweeping changes, restricting private communication between staff and students, adding cameras in classrooms, and training educators to recognize signs of grooming. Trust, once a given, became fragile. For Olivia, recovery was long and painful. She battled nightmares, guilt, and the weight of public exposure. Therapy became her lifeline, helping her understand that what happened was not her fault, that the responsibility lay solely with the man who exploited her trust. Over time, she began to heal, drawing strength from the knowledge that her courage had stopped Whitfield from harming others. Years later, Olivia chose to share her story publicly, determined to break the silence that predators rely on. Her voice became a beacon for other survivors, a reminder that speaking out can end cycles of abuse. But even as she rebuilt her life, the haunting question remained for the community: how many more Whitfields are out there, hidden behind smiles and laughter, disguising their crimes beneath the mask of care? The case of Thomas Whitfield is a stark reminder that evil often hides in the places we least expect: within classrooms, behind authority, beneath layers of charm. It is a reminder that vigilance must never fade, that trust must always be guarded, and that silence can be the most dangerous ally a predator has. And for those who sat in his classroom, once laughing at his jokes and marveling at his experiments, the memory of Mr. W will never again be one of fun or learning. Instead, it will forever be a shadow, proof that the horrors of betrayal can be hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment to strike.